Is the screen getting darker? Better not be. Yeah, I was gonna say, I froze time up in this hoe. I'd be mad as all hell if that were the case. Ooh. Share the link around. I feel like Discord has been super buggy lately, or just today in general. It's been like really off. Do. Ooh, pretty map. Yeah, it was fucky last night too. Yeah, like I said, I fell asleep. I got off of Path Titans at probably like 12, and then I fell asleep shortly after that. So I didn't really notice a change in it. But yeah. And yeah, it's pretty. It's called Hellforge. It's a PvP map, but this is their safe zone. So it rains blood apparently. I'll do a quick little like fly around after I'm done reading and whatnot, so that people can see it. It is a really pretty map, but it's meant for PvP. Alright, so once again I'm doing the whole fair warning thing of the fact that some of these words I don't say in normal conversations, so of course some of them I'm not going to be able to pronounce properly. I highly doubt some of you who end up watching this can pronounce it properly either, and if you can, then good for you, congratulations. It is what it is, sort of deal. I try to pronounce things the best way that I can. I try to sound it out in my head, and then I end up sounding dumb to begin with. So, I'm gonna read chapters 3 and 4, and that will be it, and then afterwards, and while I'm doing a quick fly round of the map as well, I will be explaining my streaming schedule, because this month, as well as next month, hopefully will be more active for me in regards to streaming, because I have ideas running in my head right now, and I'm praying that it works out. Also, another thing too, if you just see my camera moving once in a while, it's just to make sure that my PlayStation controller doesn't shut off. Alright. Now, let me see something really quick. Okay. Alright. So grab some snacks and make sure you're bundled up and all that good stuff, and let's begin. Alright. Actually, let me quickly as well mess with the settings, just so it's not too loud before I finish, or before I start reading. Okay, cool. Let's get on with the stream. Alright, chapter 3. Music is like a dream, one that I cannot hear. Conversations. Ludwig van Beethoven. Monarch Crew Residence, Barbados. Gia had been dreaming of Kong. When she was younger, she believed that he and she sometimes shared their dreams. Like Dream was a land they both visited at night, just another place like Skull Island or Hollow Earth. It had seemed so real and made total sense to her at the time. She had never questioned it. Now she wasn't sure. At school they said dreams only happened in your own brain, that the other people in them were just created by your mind. It wasn't just that, either. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. Everything was different. She felt a pain in her jaw and reached up to touch it. But when she did, she didn't find anything that actually hurt. She sighed and looked at the clock. It was 2 in the morning. She needed to get back to sleep. Instead, she worried about school. She had a test today, didn't she? She hadn't studied for it. It hadn't seemed worth doing. Maybe since she couldn't sleep, she should do that now. She climbed out of bed and into her study hut, turned on the string lights, and pulled out her pre-algebra book. She stared at the sample test, and, of course, she was suddenly very tired. Gia sat up in the darkness, not sure what had woken her, but as she sat there, she began to feel as if a wind was moving on her skin and in her hair. Her palms and the soles of her feet tingled, and in those sensations she perceived a rising and falling motion, a pulsive rhythm that was not her heart, but something outside of herself. She knew the word, singing. Her people sang sometimes, although of course she could not hear them, but sometimes when they all sang together, she thought she could feel it, like this. Their songs on her skin and vibrating gently in her bones. She rose and padded gently out into the night. Above, the familiar lights of the nocturnal sky blazed down, the stars, the white sky river, and through the trees the moon was rising, nearly full. And in the light something danced. Hundreds of small creatures with pearl-colored wings fluttered and drifted glowing in the light of the moon and stars. And they weren't just dancing, they were singing too. It was what she'd felt. She stood, stock still, for a long time, afraid that if she did anything, they would leave. After a while, someone came beside her. She could not see her face, but she knew it was Oa, her iwi mother's sister, who slept in their house with them. Oa spoke to her in the ancient way, the way that needed no sound. They only come every handful of years, Oa told her. They live as worms, high in the mountains, for all of that time. Then they wrap themselves in silk and become this. You are blessed to see them tonight. What are they singing? Gia asked. It's so beautiful. Singing, Oa said. They do not sing. They do not have voices. But I hear them, Gia said. Gia, you cannot hear them, and I hear nothing. I only see them flying in the moonlight. There was so much Gia did not know, but she knew Oa was wrong. Somehow they were singing, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. Gia woke again, this time in her study hut, her face buried in her schoolbook. She snorted, rubbed her eyes, and pushed herself up. For an instant, she thought the song had followed her from her dream, and was here with her even now. But as she came ever more awake, she realized she didn't feel anything. She had forgotten that night, hadn't she? It was so long ago, she had been so young. She could not remember Oa's face at all, and now even the words from her memory dream began to slip away. Maybe it had never been real. Memory and dream were much the same, when you were that little. She thought she recalled other things that Eileen told her probably weren't true. Maybe it had all been a wish in the night, that just once she could hear music, know what it really was to listen to a song. Just the longing of a girl to be like everyone else. But she wasn't, and she never would be. Once she'd been at peace with that. Once it hadn't mattered at all, because it hadn't mattered to Eileen or to Kong, or to anyone else she knew. That was before everything changed. Before school and more strangers than she could count. Before she understood that she would never fit in. She went back to her bed and tried to sleep again. She managed to, only an hour before she had to get up. This, she thought, was likely to be a worse day than usual. Monarch Outpost 1, Kong Observation Unit, Hollow Earth. The air of the Hollow Earth never quite smelled right to Jane. Her career had taken her many places, the highlands of Peru and Ecuador, the pampas of Argentina, the frozen coasts of Antarctica, the Congo Basin, the tropical forests of Yunnan, the Kaibab Plateau in southwestern North America. They had all smelled a little strange to her. She had mentioned that to her mother once, who just shook her head, smiled, and said something about her overactive olfactory glands, and how they had made her a nightmare of a picky eater as a child. The conversation had been a bit of an epiphany for Jane, and helped explain why no one else she knew on her various assignments had ever mentioned the scents of those places. Scent and taste were the two senses humans had that let them directly analyze the chemical content of the world around them. Of the two, scent was the most powerful, the more directly tied to emotion. It was also the least acute of the senses, at least in most people, compared to, say, a dog. Humans were virtually blind in the chemical senses. Humans were sight animals. Everything was about appearance to them. And the appearance of Hollow Earth was, to say the least, weird. The plants were strange, the animals stranger, and there were things that were a little, or a lot, of both. The sky was more landscape. There were no stars at night, no moon, no true sunsets. There were clouds sometimes, but the shapes they came in didn't look right, contorted as they were by the opposed gravitation forces of up and down, and by the null gravity zone between them. But the scents, they were arguably way stranger. Any other place she had ever been, there were whiffs of the familiar. The smell of cow dung, of diesel fumes, of rotting meat, of wet soil. These were similar everywhere up above. The Congo, the Antarctic, the dry uplands of Arizona, all had a shared biological history that went back more than 1 billion years, and thus a common chemical history. The history was shared by the hollow earth, as well, but things here had gone their own way for a very long time. This was in every way interesting. The media played up the monsters of Hollow Earth, the macrofauna, while saying almost nothing about the microfauna. This was hardly surprising. Even above, much more attention was paid to elephants, whales, pandas, and rhinoceroses than to bacteria. But the true rulers of any ecosystem, by sheer mass, diversity, and ecological importance, were mostly unseen to the naked eye. And here, that invisible world was as different, maybe more different than the big critters suggested. Both worlds had decay organisms, for instance, but they had evolved independently. Each set did the job, but in somewhat different ways, leading to different chemical outcomes. The same could be said for the dead things they turned back into soil. All vertebrates above ground had red hemoglobin-based blood. Some in the hollow earth did, too, but many had extraordinarily exotic blood and tissue in a wide variety of colors and compositions. So, of course, things smelled weird. Way stranger than any place she had ever been. She didn't mind it, but she couldn't help but notice. And maybe think about it too much, especially when Lewis took a notion to cook some of the local wildlife for their dinner, which, fortunately, didn't seem to be the plan tonight. She'd seen he had pulled out some shelf-stable tofu and rice, and he hadn't been out gathering today. She looked up, tracing her gaze along the mountains and valleys of the other side of the world, momentarily overcome by the wonder of it all. Being here was a privilege, one worth any number of funky smells. It was also dangerous. There were plenty of things down here that she smelled just fine for dinner. It didn't pay to stray far from the base alone. She hadn't. It was only a few steps behind her, a blocky utilitarian prefab that had replaced the first base about a year ago. She was turning back toward the entrance when something big moved at the perimeter, just past the screen of trees. She ran. She jerked the outer door open and slammed it closed, then looked back out through the window while she waited for the lock to cycle. Despite all the toothy predators in Hollow Earth, they had so far not discovered any pathogens that affected humans in a big way. That wasn't surprising, in evolutionary terms. Pathogens usually evolve to affect a particular host, and if there were any Homo sapiens living down here, they hadn't met them yet. Although there was evidence that there had once been at least one population of humans, or a very similar species. As she watched, the trees shook, and suddenly several of them toppled as a creature came into view. It was big, not Kong big, but bigger than an elephant. She nevertheless let out her breath, which she realized she had been holding. It had a stout, armored body that was pretty similar to that of an armadillo, but the long snake-like neck that coiled out of that ended in a small, somewhat otter-like head. As she watched, it extended its neck to nibble at the leaves of the forest canopy. When threatened, it could somehow tuck the entire neck and head into the protective shell. It had a scientific name, but they just usually called the beasts giraffes. They weren't exactly harmless. They had thick, two-hoofed hind limbs that could deliver a crushing blow to anything the giraffe perceived as threatening. But they didn't seem bothered by humans, and there hadn't been any incidents involving them. The inner door cycled. She opened it and stepped in. The outpost was heavily built and resembled a bunker more than anything. Of course, it was also a workplace for, well, science nerds. The marks of human personalities were everywhere, from the portrait of Harris's cat back home to the left-behinds from those who had come before. Her gaze lingered on the plastic figure of a spaceman. It belonged to one of the first scientists down here, Dr. Nathan Lind. Jane hadn't known him all that well, but she had always been curious about the spaceman. She meant to ask her boss about it, but she didn't know her boss that well, and it had never seemed like the right time. Anyway, the boss didn't come down that often these days. Human touches aside, the outpost was very much a working lab, busily monitoring seismic activity, electromagnetic and gravitational anomalies, weather patterns, and of course titans, which the bunker had been built to, well, maybe not withstand, but at least to resist. The only windows were as thick as the walls and were basically just narrow strips near the ceiling. They didn't provide much of a view. That came from the banks of screens monitoring the area around the outpost and more remote locations. Several of them, as usual, and as the name of the outpost suggested, were tasked with keeping track of Kong. A short while ago, they had increased the number of sensors, and were adding more after a recent incident in which Raymond Martin, a billionaire Titan hunter, had entered Hollow Earth in his own version of a heave and tried to bag Kong as a trophy. Monarch had missed the whole fight, but found the wrecked remains of the giant mech Martin had piloted in his attempt to kill the great ape. Of Martin himself, they only found blood, but enough to safely assume he was now deceased. Dr. Andrews was enraged, determined no further incidents like this would happen. At the moment, however, one of the screens was playing a television program from up top. Taxpayer dollars going to Hollow Earth and classified technologies, like the mysterious Project Powerhouse, the host was saying. Well, here to discuss Monarch's own, Dr. Eileen Andrews. It's the boss, Jane thought. Let's start with Godzilla, the interviewer said. He stopped the attack in Rome, but he's still in the city. Should we be worried? First of all, no, nobody's in danger, Andrews replied. It's clear to us now that Godzilla is a titan that protects us from other malicious titan threats. When he is dormant, there's no threat. It's as simple as that. The view changed to an aerial shot of the Roman Colosseum. The huge reptilian frame of Godzilla was curled up inside it, apparently in peaceful slumber. The crawl at the bottom of the screen said something about the titan taking over the ancient landmark, and the tourists being in awe. Of course they were. She would bet the locals had somewhat mixed feelings. The host looked skeptical. He takes out all challengers and then just decides to take a nap? Are we sure he's not hurt? Because this is a really long nap. We're not entirely sure why Godzilla has gone dormant, whether it's part of a natural hibernation cycle or something else. All we know is his vital signs are stable and he doesn't appear to be hurt. Godzilla was actually known for taking long naps, Jane mused, like for decades or centuries. Just not in obvious places where anybody or anything could easily find him. And he preferred places with sources of energy, like deep-sea thermal vents and such. What was unusual wasn't the length of his nap, but that he was doing it in public. Someone suddenly turned the sound down on the program. Harris at his station glanced over at her. Kong's heading in for the night, Harris said, nodding at another screen, on which the great ape was making his way back to the cave he had been using for a home. Looks like another rough run. Jane came closer, leaned forward with her hands on the back of Harris's swivel chair, looking at the tracking data. That's the furthest he's gone yet, she noticed. Maybe he's looking for a date, Harris said dryly. Good luck with that, Lewis chimed in, from across the room where he was lining up a putt on the little green he'd brought down with him. His wavy, graying hair stuck out from beneath a red baseball cap. His putter clicked against the ball. Hope he's up for some interspecies romance. Jane nodded. It had become a sort of running joke about Kong's search for his own kind. Early signs had been hopeful enough. It was clear that there had been more great apes in the Hollow Earth. But so far, all that evidence was centuries old or older. The current theory was that Kong's species had gotten into some kind of war with Godzilla, and maybe other titans subservient to Godzilla. It was hard to watch footage of the spectacular fight between Godzilla and Kong in Hong Kong, without the feeling that there was some long-standing antipathy between the two titans, although in the end they had parted on what one could anthropomorphize as amicable terms. Whatever was going on with Kong and Godzilla, it seemed as if the only survivors of Kong's kind had been the one upstairs on Skull Island. If so, that made Kong the last of his species. But Hollow Earth was a big place. Most of it was still terra incognita. There could be 1,000 Kongs down here. They just weren't in the area they had surveyed yet. Tell that to Kong, she thought. She knew she might be reading in her human feelings, but the big guy looked dejected. Harris frowned and tracked his gaze across the screens as one of the indicators started beeping. Hey, he said, the monitor's showing a pretty substantial sinkhole in Sector 5. Jane frowned. That's Kong's hunting ground. But it wasn't that surprising, really. Hollow Earth was, to say the least, tectonically active, and Sector 5 was heavily monitored precisely because Kong was there. She focused on the monitor, which was now displaying a graphic representation of the sinkhole. It looked like it had opened down into a much larger cave system. The computer had labeled it an uncharted area. Before she could properly absorb that, the frequency sensor also started putting up a squawk. Lewis stopped golfing and glanced over at the screen. "Whoa," he murmured. Dragging his putter across the floor, he walked over to man the station. Jane joined him. "More electrical anomalies?" Harris said. "No, I don't think so, man," Lewis said. "I haven't seen anything like this before." Jane studied the wave patterns on the screen. She couldn't make head nor tail of them either, but it strained credibility to think a sinkhole and these weird readings happening at the same time was a coincidence. "Maybe we should tell them topside," Harris said. "I'll type it up," Jane said. "This whole place is an anomaly." Almost back to his cave, Kong was startled as dozens of flying things filled the sky. They seemed frantic, as if something was coming after them. But whatever had scared them, he felt it too. Or maybe he heard it too. He wasn't sure, but something was happening, something he didn't understand. Something had changed, something big. Alright, I'm gonna take a quick drink break. Get a little drinky drink. And let me read the comments. Let me see. Okay. I think you were there for the last stream because you mentioned Scylla when Scylla got killed by Godzilla. I think you like literally said bye-bye, crab bitch, or something like that. But yeah, that video I streamed it a month ago. So let me just move this around a bit more. Let me check my battery life. Okay. Take another sippy sip. Okay. Let's see how many pages Chapter 4 has. Ooh! Chapter 4 is going to be a long one. It has 14 pages, so sit back and enjoy as I struggle reading basic English. I was struggling towards the last part of Chapter 3, but that's okay. Okay, Chapter 4. The indigenous people of the island named it Ichiroganem, the red land with white teeth. It was born at the juncture of two tectonic plates, the South American and the Caribbean. When two immense forces meet, something has to give, and in this case it was the South American plate, forced to slide beneath the Caribbean. Where the two plates scraped together, an accretion formed, and was forced upward until it rose above the waves. It still rises at a rate of about an inch per 1,000 years. When Europeans arrived, they didn't care for the native name and renamed the island Barbados, the Bearded Ones. It isn't at all clear why. What is clear or became clear as humanity began to absorb the presence of the Titans in the hollow earth is that the same forces that pushed the island from the depths also created a vortex, a pathway from the surface of the world to the hollow one beneath. The vortex isn't unlike a mouth. Maybe the indigenous people knew all along what Monarch has recently discovered. Internal Monarch memo, initial reports of stable vertices, Dr. Nathan Lind. Hollow Earth Access Point, Monarch Base, Barbados. Dr. Eileen Andrews strode through the access point facility, feeling harried. Apparently, that's what came of being in charge, as she often did, she wondered how that had happened. She loved research. She could do that all day, every day, but dealing with contractors who had yet to fully finish a facility that was supposed to be completed months ago, with a fickle public, and with politicians who didn't know a vortex from their own, well, from a hole in the ground, that was enough to make for a bad day. And lately she had a lot of days like that. She knew her assistant Wilcox was struggling to keep up with her pace through the facility and still take notes, but she couldn't slow down for him. Tell the Italian military Rome would be flattened if it weren't for Godzilla. They can threaten him all they want. Just tell them to find another scapegoat. Do you, Wilcox paused, looking stricken, actually want me to say that? She frowned at him for a second. Probably not. Just make me sound calm, she told him, and reasonable. He nodded, looked relieved, and hurried off while she continued on to control. Hampton, overall director of Monarch, met her as she came in. Director Hampton, what's up? Hampton had been with Monarch for a long time, but the two of them hadn't met until Hampton was promoted to director. She approved of Hampton. Beneath her casual, sometimes comic demeanor, the New Zealander was intensely competent. Furthermore, she knew it. She had nothing to prove. She just did her job. Well, Outpost 1 is still a nightmare, Hampton said. Apparently, they discovered a new type of beetle that eats electrical cables, so that's fun. Great. And they sent this over. She held out a sheaf of papers. This is from the sensory array? Eileen asked, studying the centerpiece of the data, a frequency graph with 3 huge peaks. Yeah, they've been picking up some weird spikes. Could be regular interference. But it keeps happening. Mm-hmm. She had discovered time and time again that ignoring anything that might be regular in Hollow Earth was usually a mistake, if not a qualifier for a Darwin Award. We should prep a survey team, she said, just to be safe. Okay, Hampton said. Eileen glanced up at the monitor, where Godzilla was still lying in the Roman Colosseum. What about Godzilla? She asked. Oh, Hampton said, still sleeping, like a big, angry baby. Well, let's hope it stays that way. Something burred in her pocket. Her cell phone set to vibrate. She pulled it out to see who it was. When she saw, her heart sank. I have to deal with this, she told Hampton. Monarch Base Academy, Barbados. Gia wanted to like school. At least her mom wanted her to like school, and she wanted to please her mom. But she didn't. It was awful. That made her feel bad because she knew she should like it. It was a better school for her than most, she'd been told. When she was little, she hadn't really understood how different she was. Of course, she was aware there was a sense called hearing, something she didn't have. She saw the people in her village react to things she wasn't aware of. She knew these things were called sounds. Eventually, she came to associate some of them, the loudest ones, with the stirrings she felt through her feet or hands, sometimes her skin or eyelashes. Sounds were a sort of vibration, just a kind she wasn't as sensitive to as others. Once she understood that, it didn't matter that much to her that she couldn't hear. The iwi, after all, didn't talk with sound, at least not very often. They had other ways of communicating, with their bodies, their faces, their hands. As long as she was looking at someone, she usually knew what they were saying. Sometimes she believed she remembered something else, whispery thoughts and words in her head that didn't come from her. But she had been very young, and like a lot of her early life, that might have just been a dream. Then came the storm and the floods, and after that her people were gone. Kong saved her from the rising waters, took care of her. Kong also communicated without speech. Oh, he made sounds that she could feel, some of them rattled all the way into her bones. But that wasn't how they talked, and they understood each other well enough. Then Mom came to take care of her. Mom couldn't talk to her the way her iwi family had, or like Kong either, but she could talk with her hands. They learned to speak to each other that way, and later Kong learned to as well, and everything was fine. But that was before she also learned that there was a very, very big world beyond the island of her birth, with many people very different from the iwi, from Kong, even from her mother. Most of them could hear, and none of them spoke like the iwi or Kong. Only a few of them could talk with their hands. That world, that big world, was not friendly to her. It was confusing and unforgiving, and she had been so happy when she and Mom and Kong were all together in the world beneath, with its crazy skies and animals and plants that reminded her of home. She had been really content there, and hoped they would all stay there forever. But Mom had to leave, to come back up into the big world of people Gia couldn't speak to or understand, and Gia had to come with her. But Mom loved her, and Mom found the school where there were teachers who could talk with their hands. There were students who could too, and at first it all seemed great. She had been excited, but over time it became clear to her that the greatest difference between her and the people in the big world wasn't that she couldn't hear. That, it turned out, was just a bit of an inconvenience. The largest difference was literally everything else. How they dressed, how they thought, what they thought about, the games they played, the things they thought were funny, the food they liked, Well, some of the food was okay. Weird, but okay. And she could have properly learned to accept all of that if they could accept her. But they didn't. At best, they thought she was strange, and at worst, some sort of monster. Some of them believed Kong was a monster and said so, and they all knew who she was before she even met them, who her mom was. Some avoided her, some made fun of her. She could read their posts and see their pictures. She knew of some things they said and how they saw her. They thought the iwi circlet she wore on her head was strange. Fair enough, no one else wore one, but it marked her as iwi, and she was willing to be thought a little odd to keep it. But they even made fun of her yellow backpack. She had chosen it because she liked the color, but no one else had a brightly colored backpack. Everyone else either had a mud-colored, black, or dark blue backpack. How could it matter that she had picked one out that made her happy? But it did. Somehow it did. And she knew how to fix all of it. All she had to do was be like them. Leave everything about her that was iwi behind. Forget Kong. Pretend. Smile. Nod. She was already forced to wear the same uniform as them. She could look they wanted on the outside. She could take off her circlet. She just needed to change the inside. Sometimes she wanted to. Really wish she could. She wanted to cut herself apart and put herself back together in a different way so she could live here and maybe even be happy. But she was the last iwi. If she stopped being iwi, her people really would be extinct. And if she cut herself apart from Kong, he would truly be alone. There was no way she was going to do either of those things. She had liked learning things before, with Mom, with the other scientists on Skull Island. Each new discovery had seemed like a jewel to be collected, thought about, cherished. School was different. She had to sit still for hours, watching the teacher, or more usually assigning assistant, tell her what she was supposed to know, not what she wanted to know, which was a lot, but what they wanted her to know, which was not at all the same thing. She trailed her way through the buildings, trying not to make eye contact. From an iwi point of view, that was rude. It suggested she didn't want to interact with anyone, which was in fact the case. Of course, none of them understood that. None of them knew anything about her people. She took her seat in Miss Cadogan's room near the back, as she usually did. Sama, one of the other students, tried to catch her attention, but Gia pretended she hadn't seen. She and Sama had been friends, sort of. Or at least she thought they had been. She'd even confided in the other girl. That was before she realized that Sama was using everything Gia told her to make fun of her behind her back, to amuse her real friends. She turned her head away from Sama, and instead looked over at the projects from last week, shadow boxes they had all made of prehistoric civilizations. Her assignment had been sorry, it sounded like I was saying Chia Pet. Cahokia, a city in North America built centuries before the arrival of the European colonizers. Her shadow box showed a flat-top pyramid made from what was supposed to be dirt. She'd used cardboard and glued sand to it, then made little human figures of wire and clay. It was okay, but she thought some of the others were way better. A sheet of paper appeared on her desk. She looked up and realized Mrs. Cadogan was passing them out. Right, they had a test today. Pre-algebra. Math with letters that were supposed to be numbers. Angles and surface area and volumes of weird shapes. Not that hard, but not her favorite. She hadn't managed to study for it. Mrs. Cadogan's mouth was moving. Gia glanced to the front of the class, where Mrs. Gross, the sign interpreter, was repeating whatever Mrs. Cadogan was saying. No cheating, she was signing, okay? Let's make sure we circle the answers completely. Really, really try and make sure you have enough time. Gia realized her eyes had closed. She shook herself and looked back down at the test. If 35% of a class are boys and 20% of boys play football, what percentage of the class plays football? Ugh. An immense vibration suddenly swept through the room, almost like when Kong roared, but it wasn't that. It was something she had never felt before. She looked around the room, expecting to see everyone reacting, but none of them seemed to notice. That was weird, because in her experience, a vibration that strong should have made a sound, a loud one, but no one even looked up. They didn't look up when the feathery white stuff started drifting down either, like ashes from a huge fire or fuzzy wind-borne flower seeds. But where were they falling from? The ceiling? The air was filled with them, and everyone just kept taking their test. Alarmed, she looked around. Ashes were falling in the shadow boxes too, and one of them caught her attention, a diorama of the 3 Egyptian pyramids. right next to a shadow box with the steeped pyramid of I'm not going to pronounce that one. But it seemed significant somehow that the Egyptian pyramids were arranged as three, the one in the middle being a little bigger. And wait, there was something on the pyramid. It looked like a little model of Kong. Was that a leaf wing hanging by a thread from the top? Those hadn't been there before. Was someone making fun of her again? Her gaze tracked across the digital clock on the wall. As soon as she saw it, the red numerals began to blur and squiggle, reforming into a sort of graph with three bell-shaped peaks. Then she felt the vibration again, stronger this time, and it was like she wasn't in the room at all. She was somewhere else. Blurry figures appeared, people, but she couldn't see their faces. She knew they were important, though, that they were trying to tell her something urgent. They needed help, her help. Someone shook her arm. She looked up and saw Mrs. Cadigan staring down at her. At the same time, Gia realized she had her pencil, not held with her fingers for writing, but gripped in her fist, and she was scribbling furiously with it. Everyone in the class was looking at her, as if she had done something wrong. Mrs. Cadigan held up her hands and began to sign. Gia, what did you do? Then the teacher reached down for her test paper, and Gia understood. The test was covered with pencil scribbles, 3 peaks like she had seen on the clock. So was the desk. But she didn't remember doing it. When had she done it? She thought she might have fallen asleep, but only for a second or two. It didn't make sense, but clearly she was in trouble. Eileen met Mrs. Cadigan outside Gia's classroom. She could see Gia and Spy inside, with spray bottle and rag, cleaning a desk. The teacher had been brief on the phone, but she'd gathered that Gia had been scribbling on it, which was strange. Gia liked to draw, sure, but drawing on something that wasn't hers? It seemed out of character. Or maybe she just liked to think so. Sometimes she thought she didn't know her daughter anymore. She pulled her gaze from Gia and focused on Mrs. Cadigan. Gia's very intelligent, the teacher was saying. The problem is, she's not engaged. Her grades are slipping. She's not interacting with any of her friends. She's distracted, moody, isolated. These problems aren't going away, Miss Andrews. If anything, they're getting worse. Miss Cadigan handed her 2 sheets of paper. They looked like a quiz of some sort, but they were covered in pencil scribbles of dark, narrow chevrons. Spearheads? There was something familiar about them. What's this? She asked. Well, it's not pre-algebra, the teacher said. Eileen found the sarcasm irritating, but she tried to keep her cool. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just... she's still adjusting to our world. I understand that, Cadigan said, but we have a number of students who are culturally displaced and they... Sure, but she's not culturally displaced, Eileen corrected. She is her culture. She's the last living member of the Iwi tribe. That struck home, and Cadigan's demeanor softened. We're just trying to reach her. Eileen looked back through the window in the classroom door, where Gia was finishing her task. She sighed. I know, she said. Join the club. Eileen decided not to pull Gia for the day. Her daughter already missed too much school, and there was less than an hour left anyway, and said she took a walk along the shore thinking. The problem with being good at your job in an organization like Monarch, like most organizations actually, was that if you were too good at it, you ran the risk of being moved out of it into administration. The logic being that if you were competent at field work, you would be good at running things too. In her case, of course, there had been more at play than that. Her position as the leading authority on Kong had landed her on the national media stage, and unlike some earlier members of Monarch leadership, she didn't seem likely to try and end the world. The public not only wasn't terrified of her, they actually liked her. So yes, she was good at what she did, but there was a PR element to her selection that she both understood and accepted. Even with all of that, she could have still said no when she had been tapped for the director of Kong Observation Project. On many levels, she wanted to. She hadn't been sure she was cut out for it, and she still wasn't. But her personal inclinations hadn't been the only factor to consider. There had also been Gia. Her daughter's childhood had been, to say the least, highly unstable, not just emotionally, but physically. She had been in more mortal danger by the time she was 11 than Eileen had faced in her entire life, and her life had been quite adventurous. Hollow Earth was amazing, and it was ludicrously unsafe, even with a titan like Kong as your bodyguard. There weren't many humans down there to start with, and no other children at all. Still, at first it had seemed to work, or she fooled herself into thinking so. The first wart dog attack had changed all of that. She and a team had been following Kong when they ran into the pack, and she made the mistake of letting Gia come along. The predators had sized up Kong and decided the little things following him were a better bet for dinner. Monarch lost 2 people. She lost 2 friends, and she and Gia were also very nearly killed. If Kong hadn't looked back and seen what was happening, they would have died. The thought of her daughter dying was intolerable. The thought of her own death was only slightly better. If she was gone, who would take care of Gia? What would happen to her? So she took the job as director. She put Gia in a school, a good school. She'd hoped for the best. This wasn't the best, but it was a damn sight better than being torn to bits by wart dogs. When she got back to the school, kids were streaming away from it on their bikes and on foot. Most of them lived in Monarch housing, so they didn't have to go far. Gia would normally walk, too, but Eileen had driven here, and left instructions for Gia to meet her at the car. The girl was there, staring at the pad that streamed via several relays, the surveillance of Kong from Hollow Earth. Gia spent a lot of time watching the Titan, which was understandable, but Eileen was beginning to fear that it was getting in the way of other things. Gia didn't look up when she arrived. Eileen took hold of the pad and gently but firmly pulled it from her grasp. "What's up?" she signed. "Nothing," the girl replied. "I'm worried about Kong." Eileen nodded a little, then unfolded the test papers Miss Cadigan had given to her. "Why did you draw this?" Gia took the papers, glanced at them, and looked away. She shrugged in a way that meant, "I don't know." "Can we go?" the girl signed. She looked away and started to get in the car. Eileen put her hand on her shoulder to stop her. "Look at me," she demanded. Gia did look at her then. "I don't belong here," she said. "I don't belong anywhere." Gia's pain and confusion was as clear as any sign. "You belong with me," Eileen signed, "and I belong with you." Gia was still for a moment, then nodded. "Come on," Eileen said as they got in the car. When they got back to their apartment in the Monarch crew residence, Gia went to her room. Eileen let her have her space. Everyone needed alone time, and Gia more than most. She re-emerged a little later to eat a light supper of leftover takeout. Eileen sat with her, poking at her own food. "Anything else happened today?" she attempted. Gia lifted her shoulders and dropped them. "Probably," she signed back. "How's wine?" she asked. "Wine? Or when?" I don't know, I'm just going to say when. When was the child of one of the Monarch engineers, briefly stationed on Skull Island. When and their father hadn't lived on the island. They had been at the nearby facility, in Kiribati. When had been over a few times. "When has a sugar," Gia replied. "I haven't seen them lately." "Sugar? Like a best friend? That they kiss?" "Oh," Eileen said. 13. Right. "What about Sama?" Gia frowned. "I'm finished eating. May I go to my room?" Eileen nodded and watched her leave. She had 1,000 things that called for her attention, but none of them seemed that important at the moment. She took Gia's drawings out and looked at them again, and once more they seemed familiar somehow. She started pulling out her books and notes. Maybe it was iwi, iconography, or something else Gia's mind had dredged up from her oldest memories. It could be the silhouette of a mountain range, or... She didn't know, but something told her it was important. While she went through the literature she had handy, a lot of which she had written, she put a documentary about Skull Island. There was a fair bit of footage of iwi life, craft and culture. Toward the end, it featured scenes of Gia when she was much younger, when Kong had been watching over her, and later when she had come into Eileen's care. It was only a few years ago, but it already seemed like decades. Gia was so little, and she realized that when she closed her eyes, that's how she still saw her. But she was growing up fast, wasn't she? She had a friend her age who already had a sugar. A faint sound caught her attention. Gia was there in shorts and t-shirt. She liked to wear to bed. She was staring at the screen at the moving images of her and Kong. "Are you ready for bed?" she signed. Gia nodded. She switched her regard to the monitor feed, showing Kong asleep in his cave. "He's lonely," she signed. "I know, honey." She stood up and opened her arms. She was afraid Gia would ignore it, but the girl stepped in for a hug. "Good night, Mom." "Good night." Gia went back to her room. Eileen heard the door close. Then she nodded and went back to work. And that is the end of that for chapter 3 and 4. Oh my god, I had brain fart throughout some of that. Some of these words are too advanced for my stupid brain. Don't worry about me, guys. I am fine, I promise. I know what I am saying. I know what I am doing. Okay. Oh, let me get my fat ass up here in game really quick. Alright. And then I'm going to talk a bit about my stream schedule really quick as well, just to get it over with, as I fly around the area. I am slow as hell, I apologize. Okay, so basically, what's going to be happening this month is I'm going to be doing a Veilguard stream, which I have mentioned before. Now, I don't have a set date, day that I'm going to be streaming Veilguard, but I kind of want to do it sometime this month. Also, too, what I plan on doing as well, because of the fact that in my Discord I had people vote for the books that they wanted me to read out loud or on my stream. Oh, hang on one second. Back to what I was saying, my headset unplugged. Um, Obviously people voted, and the one that got the most votes, of course, was Godzilla X Kong, as I've mentioned before, and as, of course, you guys could tell, I've been reading it, duh. The other book that was voted, the second most votes, was a book called The Last Flight, which it takes place in the Dragon Age world, and I thought it would be perfect to read it as well, because I'm going to be streaming Veilguard at the same time in the month of November and, of course, December. So, what's going to happen? Some days I'm going to, when I stream with reading, it's going to be Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire. Some other days when I stream, it's going to be The Last Flight. Obviously, each day will be labeled of when I read it, and depending on how long the chapters are, and depending on how well my voice is doing, I will let you guys know how many chapters I'll be reading and whatnot. Also, too, a lot of multiplayer games, sadly. So games like Phasmophobia, which that's the main one that I feel like is a multiplayer game that I would stream and play, because I only streamed it once, and I felt bad that I didn't really stream too much of it, because I was having too much of a Veilguard brain rot. That's on me. I won't be able to really stream it, because I have no time for it, and also, too, my PlayStation Plus runs out this month. So, yippee for me. But that's going to be the streaming schedule in regards to what I will be doing. It's mainly going to be reading streams, it's going to be Veilguard. I also did notice as well, looking back on my streams, I have not been streaming Skyrim as of late, so I'm going to be doing a poll to see if people want me to continue doing the Tales of Princess Exotic Butters, the orc that I had, or if we should just scrap that entirely. However, I'm going to leave it up to the viewers. I really, really want to get back into streaming. I miss it. I love it. I thrive in it. I live for it. There is another thing that I'm going to be doing that's going to be taking a lot more time to set up, however, and it's not going to be a live stream. I'm going to be doing something called Path of Titans. Now, Path of Titans is, of course, going to be played on Path of Titans, as the name suggests. However, Path of Titans, basically, I will keep you guys up to date on drama that is currently happening within the community of Path of Titans. The first episode is already going to be really, really digging deep. Consider the Path of Titans episodes basically warnings on people who to look out for and who to avoid. I make these videos, or I'm going to be making those videos, not for people to do witch hunts on those individuals, but basically, hey, if you see them, report them, avoid them. If they're in a community server, you let the owners know, you let the admins know, or the moderators know. You do not start anything. You do not go after them. You let someone else handle the situation. Someone else that can handle the situation. So I'm going to be doing that series to kind of like, you know, help people out who either are starting servers or who play on official servers, in order, basically, as kind of like, hey, watch out for this person. This is what they have been known to do. Those episodes will also have a lot of proof as well. So it's not just me talking out of my ass. There will be Google document evidence, there will be screenshot evidence, all sorts of evidence against these individuals. And once again, when those episodes do come out, they're going to be all over the place, because I hopefully will plan on... I plan on getting an editor to potentially edit those videos as well to make them more serious, because it's going to be delving into very serious topics for those videos. So it's going to be a different type of like streaming that I do, or different types of videos that I do, but I feel like it's something that I want to do, because I want people who play this game, and just any other game in particular, to be wary of these people and to be safe at all times. So that is what is going to be happening in the next couple of months and into next year. Also, another thing I should point out as well, I am getting a vehicle this week. meaning I will be getting a hopefully full-time job, which in Discord I will make notice, or I will make mention to people when I will be working, and if my streaming schedule will change during that time, which it will change during that time. But hopefully it's not too bad, but you know, I always say, in real life always comes first. Alright, I'm not gonna do this video any longer, I'm not gonna keep talking your ears off. I will see you all in the next live stream, and for those who have not joined my Discord yet, feel free to do so. I will be posting more streaming things up on there, and also we have fun on my Discord as well. I have been using the community tab as of late on YouTube, however, I'm still not used to it, so sometimes I forget to post it. However, once again, like I said, feel free to join our Discord. We offer a variety of things on our Discord, or on my Discord, where you could talk about gaming, whether you are playing on PlayStation, Xbox, even your Nintendo Switch as well, PC as well, cross-platform games. We have an anime area where you can talk about anime, manga, movie and TV discussions as well, book discussions. We have it all. Sometimes it's been rare as of late, but sometimes we'll either watch movies, we'll sit down and watch movies together, YouTube videos together, or even TV shows together. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to join. But I will see you all next video, which I will hopefully be posting more about on my Discord and my community tab.